Before Isaac Hayes became chef on South Park, he starred in a blaxploitation film so bizarre that it featured Star Trek's Lieutenant Uhura as a profanity-spewing madam, a script originally written for Robert Mitchum that got completely transformed when nobody white would take the role, and a soundtrack that Quentin Tarantino would later sample for Kill Bill, making this 1974 gem far stranger than fiction. Fact 1. Originally written for white actors. What would eventually become Isaac Hayes' starring vehicle as a tough bounty hunter in 1974 actually began life as a completely different kind of movie. The original script for Truck Turner was written by screenwriter Lee Chapman as a starring role for some of Hollywood's biggest white action stars of the era. The studio had their sights set on three major names who were known for playing gritty, no-nonsense characters: Lee Marvin, the silver-haired tough guy from The Dirty Dozen and Point Blank; Robert Mitchum, the legendary actor famous for his roles in film noir classics; and Ernest Borgnine, the Oscar-winning character actor who could handle both drama and action with equal skill. But Hollywood being Hollywood, none of these A-list actors were available or interested in the project. When American International Pictures found themselves without a leading man, producer Larry Gordon made a decision that would completely transform the film's identity. As director Jonathan Kaplan later recalled, Gordon simply said, "Well, we can't get any of them, so now it's a black picture." Just like that, the entire concept shifted from a traditional white action hero story to what would become part of the blaxploitation movement that was gaining momentum in the early 70s. This wasn't an unusual practice for American International Pictures at the time. The studio was known for being flexible with their projects, often adapting scripts and concepts to fit whatever talent they could actually secure or whatever market trends were hot at the moment. The transformation from a Robert Mitchum vehicle to an Isaac Hayes showcase perfectly captured how the film industry was evolving during this period, as studios recognized the commercial potential of films made specifically for African American audiences who had been largely overlooked by mainstream Hollywood for decades. Fact 2. Nichelle Nichols, only blaxploitation film. For audiences who knew Nichelle Nichols only as the dignified and professional Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek, seeing her in Truck Turner must have been absolutely shocking. This 1974 film represents the one and only time that Nichols ventured into the blaxploitation genre, playing a character named Dorinda, who was about as far from her Starship Bridge persona as humanly possible. While Lieutenant Uhura was known for her calm professionalism and polite "hailing frequencies open," Captain Dorinda was a foul-mouthed madam who ran a stable of prostitutes and spent most of her screen time spewing profanities that would make a sailor blush. What makes this career choice even more interesting is that Truck Turner turned out to be Nichols' sole exploration of this popular film genre. Throughout the 1970s, blaxploitation films were incredibly successful and offered many opportunities for African American actors to take on leading roles in action-packed stories. Studios were actively casting performers for these movies, and Nichols certainly would have been offered other similar projects after her memorable performance as the vengeful Dorinda. However, she made a conscious decision to turn down every single blaxploitation offer that came her way after Truck Turner. Instead of pursuing more film roles in this lucrative genre, Nichols chose to focus her attention on two very different paths that were much closer to her heart. She dedicated significant time to appearing at Star Trek conventions around the country, where she could connect directly with the fans who had fallen in love with her groundbreaking character. Even more importantly, she began working as a recruiter for NASA, using her fame and influence to encourage women and people of color to pursue careers in space exploration and aeronautics, helping to diversify an industry that had traditionally been dominated by white men. Fact 3. Female screenwriter used male pseudonym. Behind the tough guy action and gritty street scenes of Truck Turner was a screenplay written by someone Hollywood would never have expected: a woman. Lee Chapman was one of the very few female screenwriters working in the action genre during the 1970s, a time when the film industry was even more male-dominated than it is today. Chapman had an unusual specialty for a woman in that era, as she focused specifically on writing action movies and would later go on to create scripts for projects like the pilot episode of Walker, Texas Ranger. For Truck Turner, Chapman made the decision to hide her gender behind a male pseudonym, crediting herself as Jerry Wilkes. This wasn't just any random name she picked out of thin air. Jerry Wilkes was actually part of her ex-husband's name, making it a personal choice that connected to her own life story. Using male pen names wasn't uncommon for female writers who wanted their work to be taken seriously, especially in genres like action films where studios and audiences might have been skeptical about a woman's ability to write convincing tough guy dialogue and violent confrontations. What makes Chapman's situation even more unusual is how she felt about the finished product. Years later, when discussing her work on the film, Chapman expressed genuine confusion about why she even received a story credit for Truck Turner. She explained that the final movie had been changed so dramatically from her original script that she barely recognized it as her own work. According to Chapman, her original story didn't include most of the elements that made the film a blaxploitation picture, such as the focus on pimps and prostitutes that became central to the plot. The transformation from her initial concept to the finished film was so complete that she questioned whether her contribution was significant enough to warrant official recognition. Fact 4. Yaphet Kotto needed quick cash. Sometimes the most practical reasons lead actors to take on roles that become memorable parts of film history, and that was exactly the case with Yaphet Kotto's decision to appear in Truck Turner. The accomplished actor, who would later become famous for his roles in films like Alien and Live and Let Die, found himself in a personal situation that made taking this blaxploitation project a financial necessity rather than an artistic choice. Kotto was going through a divorce at the time the film was being cast, and like many people dealing with the expensive legal and personal costs of ending a marriage, he needed money quickly to cover his mounting expenses. This behind-the-scenes reality adds an interesting layer to Kotto's performance as Harvard Blue, the ruthless pimp and main antagonist who becomes Isaac Hayes' primary enemy in the film. While audiences watching Truck Turner saw a convincing portrayal of a cold-blooded criminal mastermind, they had no idea that the actor bringing this character to life was motivated by very real financial pressures in his personal life. Kotto's professional approach to the role meant that his personal circumstances never showed on screen, and he delivered a memorable villain that many consider one of the film's strongest elements. The fact that Kotto took the role primarily for the paycheck rather than artistic fulfillment speaks to the practical realities that working actors face, even those with impressive credentials and talent. Divorce proceedings can be financially devastating, requiring immediate cash flow to pay for lawyers, temporary living arrangements, and all the other costs that come with dissolving a marriage. For Kotto, Truck Turner represented a steady paycheck during a difficult personal period, proving that even seasoned professionals sometimes have to make career decisions based on immediate financial needs rather than long-term artistic goals. Fact 5. Released as double feature with Foxy Brown. When American International Pictures decided to release Truck Turner in theaters during 1974, they paired it with another film that would become a blaxploitation classic, Foxy Brown, starring Pam Grier. This wasn't just a random pairing of two movies that happened to be ready at the same time. It was a carefully planned double feature that brought together what many film historians now consider one of the most powerful combinations in the entire blaxploitation genre. Movie theaters would show both films back-to-back for a single ticket price, giving audiences nearly 3 hours of non-stop action, revenge, and funk-filled soundtracks. The pairing made perfect business sense for American International Pictures, a studio that had become experts at creating these kinds of theatrical packages. Both films featured strong African-American protagonists seeking revenge against criminal organizations. Both had memorable soundtracks that appealed to the same audience, and both delivered the kind of gritty urban action that blaxploitation fans craved. Foxy Brown told the story of a woman who goes after the drug dealers who killed her boyfriend, while Truck Turner focused on a bounty hunter being hunted by pimps and assassins after a job goes wrong. What made this double bill particularly special was the star power involved. Pam Grier was already becoming the undisputed queen of blaxploitation films, having appeared in several successful entries in the genre, while Isaac Hayes brought his own celebrity status as the Oscar-winning composer of the Shaft theme song. Together, these two films offered moviegoers an entire evening of entertainment that showcased both a strong female action hero and a male counterpart, covering all the bases that blaxploitation audiences wanted to see. The success of this double feature helped establish the template for how studios would market similar films throughout the rest of the decade. Fact 6. Isaac Hayes' first and only starring role. Isaac Hayes came to Truck Turner with massive fame and credibility, thanks to his Oscar-winning theme song for Shaft in 1971. But what many people don't realize is that this blaxploitation film represents both the beginning and the end of his career as a leading man in movies. While Hayes had appeared in another film called Three Tough Guys earlier in 1974, Truck Turner was his first and only attempt at carrying a movie as the main star, and the experience apparently convinced him that acting wasn't where his talents were best suited. The transition from music to acting isn't always smooth, even for someone with Hayes' natural charisma and cool presence. In Truck Turner, Hayes plays Mac Truck Turner, a former football player turned bounty hunter, and while he brings his own authentic personality to the role, it's clear that he's more comfortable behind a microphone than in front of a camera delivering dialogue. Hayes essentially plays himself rather than disappearing into a character, which works for this particular film, but also reveals the limitations of his acting range. What makes this career choice particularly interesting is that Hayes had everything going for him to become a major action star if he had wanted to pursue that path. He had the physical presence, the voice, the name recognition, and the cool factor that audiences loved in the blaxploitation era. The success of the Shaft soundtrack had made him a household name, and studios were eager to capitalize on that fame by putting him in front of cameras. However, after Truck Turner, Hayes made the smart decision to focus on what he did best: creating music. He continued to compose soundtracks and produce albums, while his acting career remained limited to small roles and cameos, including his later famous work as the voice of Chef on South Park. Fact 7. AIP wanted Hayes for the soundtrack. The real reason Isaac Hayes ended up starring in Truck Turner had nothing to do with his acting abilities, and everything to do with his incredible musical talents. American International Pictures desperately wanted to get their hands on Isaac Hayes' next soundtrack project after he won the Academy Award for Best Original Song in 1972 for his theme from Shaft. That Oscar win had turned Hayes into one of the hottest composers in Hollywood, and his funk-filled, orchestral soundtracks were selling albums and drawing audiences to theaters just as much as the movies themselves were. Studio executives at AIP knew that a new Isaac Hayes soundtrack could be worth its weight in gold, both for the film itself and as a separate album release that could generate additional revenue for months or even years after the movie left theaters. However, Hayes wasn't necessarily interested in just composing music for someone else's movie. He had bigger ambitions and wanted to expand his presence in the entertainment industry beyond just being the guy who wrote great theme songs. This created the perfect opportunity for a Hollywood-style deal that benefited both parties. AIP agreed to let Hayes take on his first starring role as the tough bounty hunter Mac Truck Turner, giving him the chance to prove himself as a leading man, but only if he would also provide the complete musical score for the film. It was essentially a package deal, where Hayes got to fulfill his acting ambitions, while the studio got the soundtrack they desperately wanted from one of the most successful composers in the business. Some industry insiders later suggested that AIP was primarily interested in the soundtrack album and the explosive movie trailer that Hayes' music would help create, with the actual film being almost secondary to those marketing tools. Fact 8. Dick Anthony Williams was initially cast. Before Isaac Hayes ever stepped foot on the set of Truck Turner, another actor was already attached to play the title role of the tough bounty hunter. Dick Anthony Williams, a talented performer who had made his mark in previous blaxploitation films, was originally cast as Mac Truck Turner and was preparing to take on what would have been one of his biggest starring roles. Williams was well known to audiences in this genre, having appeared in memorable supporting roles in films like The Mac in 1973 and Slaughter's Big Ripoff that same year, which made him a logical choice for American International Pictures when they were looking for their leading man. However, Williams' time as the star of Truck Turner turned out to be incredibly short-lived. The studio quickly decided to replace him with Isaac Hayes, and the reason for this sudden change had everything to do with name recognition and commercial appeal. While Williams was certainly a capable actor with solid credentials in the blaxploitation world, Hayes brought something to the table that no other performer could match at that time. He was a genuine household name thanks to his Oscar-winning success with the Shaft soundtrack. The decision to replace Williams with Hayes was purely a business calculation based on star power and marketing potential. Hayes had recently become the third African American to win a competitive Academy Award, and his theme from Shaft was still playing on radio stations across the country. From the studio's perspective, having Isaac Hayes' name on the movie poster and in the advertising materials would draw far more people to theaters than Dick Anthony Williams could, regardless of their relative acting abilities. This kind of last-minute casting change wasn't unusual in Hollywood, especially for lower-budget films where studios needed every advantage they could get to compete with bigger productions for audience attention. Fact 9. Cat scene stealers throughout. In the middle of all the gunfights, car chases, and tough guy dialogue in Truck Turner, some of the most memorable moments actually belong to a couple of four-legged performers who weren't even credited in the cast list. The film features two cats that manage to steal scenes from Isaac Hayes himself, proving that sometimes the most unexpected characters can leave the biggest impression on audiences. The first of these feline scene stealers is Francis, a beautiful ginger tabby cat who belongs to Truck's girlfriend Annie, and becomes an important part of the story throughout the movie. Francis makes his presence known right from the opening scenes of the film, and not in the most pleasant way for poor Truck Turner. As Hayes is getting ready for work in the morning, he puts on what he thinks is a clean shirt, only to discover that Francis has urinated on it, leaving Truck with the unpleasant surprise of having to find something else to wear. This wasn't just a one-time incident either. Francis apparently had a habit of marking his territory on Truck's clothing, as the same thing happens again later in the movie, creating a running gag that shows even tough bounty hunters have to deal with the everyday realities of pet ownership. The second cat appears near the end of the film and plays a crucial role in bringing Truck and Annie back together after their relationship has been strained by all the violence and danger. When Annie is being released from jail, Truck is waiting for her with a peace offering that he knows she can't resist, an adorable Abyssinian kitten. The kitten is sitting on the passenger seat of Truck's car, and in a detail that connects back to Francis, it has already peed on another one of Truck's shirts. Annie immediately falls in love with the tiny cat, and this gesture of bringing her a new pet helps convince her to forgive Truck and climb into the car with him. Fact 10. Epic chase through water treatment plant. One of the most exciting and visually striking sequences in Truck Turner takes place in an unexpected location that most action movies would never think to use as a backdrop for high-speed pursuit. When Truck and his partner Jerry are chasing after the dangerous pimp named Gator, the pursuit leads them through a massive water treatment plant located near Los Angeles International Airport, creating what many fans and critics consider to be the film's most memorable action set piece. This wasn't just a quick drive-through either. The chase sequence takes full advantage of the industrial setting, with cars weaving between enormous concrete structures, massive pipes, and the kind of mechanical equipment that makes for dramatic visuals. The water treatment plant setting gives the chase a unique look and feel that sets it apart from typical car chases through city streets or highway scenes that audiences were used to seeing in action films of that era. The industrial landscape creates an almost post-apocalyptic atmosphere, with the concrete and steel structures providing interesting obstacles and visual elements that the filmmakers could use to make the sequence more dynamic and exciting. Director Jonathan Kaplan and his crew clearly recognized the cinematic potential of this location and made sure to capture the scale and complexity of the facility during the pursuit. What makes this chase even more memorable is how it ends up being just one part of a longer sequence that continues after the cars stop moving. When Gator crashes his vehicle and escapes on foot into the treatment plant, Truck and Jerry have to follow him through the maze of industrial equipment and walkways, turning the chase from a vehicular pursuit into a foot chase through an environment that feels more like a science fiction movie set than a typical urban action film backdrop. Fact 11. Tarantino sampled the soundtrack. Nearly 30 years after Truck Turner hit theaters, Isaac Hayes' funky soundtrack got a second life thanks to one of Hollywood's most music-obsessed directors, Quentin Tarantino, who built his reputation partly on his ability to find forgotten gems from old movies and give them new context, discovered the perfect piece of music from the Truck Turner soundtrack to use in his 2003 martial arts epic Kill Bill Volume 1. The specific track that caught Tarantino's attention was the Truck Turner theme, a driving, bass-heavy piece that perfectly captured the tough, no-nonsense attitude of Hayes' bounty hunter character. Tarantino chose to use this music during one of Kill Bill's most memorable moments, when Uma Thurman's character, known as the Bride, wakes up from her coma and discovers that she needs to find a way to escape from the hospital. As she makes her way through the parking lot looking for transportation, she spots a bright yellow pickup truck with Pussy Wagon painted on the tailgate. The moment when the bride finds this vehicle and realizes it will be her getaway car is underscored by Hayes' Truck Turner theme, creating a perfect musical match between the original Bounty Hunter movie and Tarantino's revenge story. This wasn't just a random musical choice. It was a deliberate homage that connected the themes of both films while showcasing Tarantino's deep knowledge of 70s cinema. Both Truck Turner and Kill Bill feature protagonists who are essentially hunters tracking down their targets, and both films draw heavily from the gritty, urban action movies of the 1970s. By using Hayes' music in this specific scene, Tarantino was paying tribute to the blaxploitation era, while also giving new audiences a chance to discover the powerful soundtrack that many people had never heard before. Fact 12. Alternative title: Black Bullet. When Truck Turner was being prepared for release in different markets around the world, the film's distributors decided that the original title might not pack enough punch to draw audiences into theaters, so they came up with an alternative name that sounded much more explosive and action-packed. In some markets, the movie was released under the title Black Bullet, a name that immediately suggested gunfights, violence, and the kind of high-energy action that blaxploitation fans were looking for when they bought their movie tickets. The decision to use Black Bullet as an alternative title was a smart marketing move that reflected how movie studios in the 1970s thought about selling their films to different audiences. While Truck Turner clearly identified the main character and suggested that he was a tough guy, the name didn't necessarily tell potential viewers that they were in for a movie filled with shootouts, car chases, and all the explosive action that the film actually delivered. Black Bullet, on the other hand, immediately communicated that this was going to be a hard-hitting action movie with plenty of gunplay and violence. This kind of title switching wasn't unusual for exploitation films of this era, as distributors often tried different approaches to see what would work best in various markets or regions. Sometimes a movie would have completely different titles in different countries, or even different titles in different cities within the same country, depending on what the local theater owners and distributors thought would sell the most tickets. The Black Bullet title also played into the blaxploitation genre's tendency to use bold, attention-grabbing names that left no doubt about what kind of movie experience audiences could expect, emphasizing the action and attitude that made these films so popular with their target demographic. Fact 13. Queen Latifah attempted 2004 remake. 30 years after Isaac Hayes starred as the tough bounty hunter in the original film, Hollywood decided it was time to bring Truck Turner back to the big screen with a modern twist. In 2004, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer partnered with Queen Latifah's production company, Flavor Unit Entertainment, to develop a remake of the 1974 blaxploitation classic. The timing seemed perfect for this kind of project, as Queen Latifah was riding high on the success of her role in the hit comedy Barbershop 2, which had just claimed the #1 spot at the box office and proven her ability to draw audiences to theaters. The remake project brought together some interesting creative elements that suggested it could have been a successful modern update of the original story. Queen Latifah was set to take on the title role, which would have transformed the character from a male bounty hunter into a strong female protagonist, fitting perfectly with her screen persona as a tough, no-nonsense performer who could handle both action and comedy with equal skill. The studio hired screenwriter Chris Frazina to write the script, presumably updating the story for contemporary audiences, while maintaining the core elements that made the original film memorable. However, despite the star power of Queen Latifah and the backing of a major studio like MGM, the Truck Turner remake never made it past the development stage. Like many Hollywood projects that get announced with great fanfare, this one quietly disappeared from production schedules without any official explanation about why it was canceled. The reasons could have been anything from script problems to scheduling conflicts to simply changing priorities at the studio. But whatever caused the project to fall apart, moviegoers never got to see Queen Latifah take on the role that Isaac Hayes had made famous 3 decades earlier. Fact 14. Soundtrack found in bargain bins. Given Isaac Hayes' incredible success with the Shaft soundtrack, which had won him an Academy Award and sold millions of copies worldwide, music fans and record executives had high expectations for his next film score project. Unfortunately, the Truck Turner soundtrack became a perfect example of how lightning doesn't always strike twice, even when the same talented artist is involved. Despite featuring Hayes' signature blend of funky bass lines, orchestral arrangements, and soul-influenced compositions, the Truck Turner soundtrack failed to capture the public's imagination the way his previous work had. And it quickly became one of the most disappointing commercial releases of his career. The contrast between the two soundtracks was particularly stark when it came to sales figures and cultural impact. While the Shaft soundtrack had climbed the charts, received constant radio play, and become a defining sound of early 70s popular music, the Truck Turner soundtrack barely registered with mainstream audiences and radio programmers. This commercial failure meant that record stores across the country soon found themselves with stacks of unsold vinyl albums that they needed to move out of their inventory as quickly as possible. For years after its initial release, bargain hunters and dedicated record collectors could find copies of the Truck Turner soundtrack sitting in the discount bins of record stores, often selling for just $1 or $2 instead of the full retail price. This ironic situation meant that one of the most accomplished film composers of the era had created a soundtrack that was literally being sold as a bargain basement item. The album's fortunes didn't begin to change until the early 1990s, when it was reissued as part of a double CD package that also included Hayes' soundtrack for another lesser-known film called Three Tough Guys, and then again as a standalone CD release in 2002. Fact 15. Los Angeles Times called it surreal. When Truck Turner was released in 1974, most critics and audiences probably expected it to be just another straightforward blaxploitation action film with plenty of gunfights, car chases, and funky music. However, at least one major newspaper critic saw something much more sophisticated and artistically ambitious in Jonathan Kaplan's direction and the film's overall visual approach. The Los Angeles Times reviewer was so impressed with the movie's style and cinematography that they praised it as an extraordinary visual experience, and went even further by comparing it to one of the most critically acclaimed and visually innovative thrillers of the late 1960s. The comparison that the Los Angeles Times made was particularly striking because they said Truck Turner was as successfully surreal as Point Blank, referring to the 1967 film directed by John Boorman and starring Lee Marvin. Point Blank was widely regarded as a masterpiece of stylized filmmaking, with its dreamlike sequences, unusual camera angles, and psychological approach to the traditional crime thriller format. For a major newspaper to suggest that a low-budget blaxploitation film had achieved the same level of visual sophistication as this acclaimed art house thriller was an incredibly high compliment that most people in the film industry probably never expected to see. This review reveals that Truck Turner had artistic qualities that went far beyond what audiences might have expected from a typical action movie of this era. The Los Angeles Times critic was recognizing that director Jonathan Kaplan had brought a unique visual sensibility to the project, creating moments and sequences that felt more like abstract art than conventional storytelling. The fact that a respected newspaper would compare Isaac Hayes' starring vehicle to a Lee Marvin psychological thriller suggests that Truck Turner succeeded in creating its own distinctive atmosphere and style, elevating it above other films in its genre through creative cinematography and direction.